It's the week ending Saturday the 8th of September, and this is The Week Unwrapped, brought to you by Barclays Corporate Banking. In the past 7 days, we've seen a tropical cyclone batter the coast of Japan, China announcing a $60 billion investment in Africa, and Nike owners burning their trainers after the company chose NFL national anthem protest leader Colin Kaepernick to front its new ad campaign. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Rebecca Gillie, let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Jamie Timson and Kari Wilkin. And from the Week Junior, who else but Felicity Capon? And to start the show this week, it's Kari. What should this week be remembered for?
I think this is the week we ask, is this the advent of taxes on free speech?
Many people here in Uganda's capital Kampala aren't happy about having to pay to use the internet's most popular services. So when Bobby Wine, a pop star and MP, led a demonstration against the new social media tax, crowds quickly gathered.
We are opposed to the social media tax because it is a personal attack on the young people of Uganda. Social media is the last platform for us to express ourselves as the young people of Uganda after being oppressed for so long, 32 years. The president is so angry because the young people don't support him and they tell him straight in his face on social media.
Users have to pay about 6 cents a day to be able to access WhatsApp, Facebook and other services.
People power!
President Yoweri Museveni said the tax will help to reduce gossip. The activists here say it's an indiscriminate tax that hurts the poor most.
That was Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb reporting back in July on protests in Uganda over so-called social media tax. Kari, what is a social media tax and why are we talking about it this week?
Well, basically, it's back in the news because Benin has become the third African nation in as many months to tax the use of social media, following in the footsteps of Zambia, which introduced a similar tax in August, and Uganda, as we just heard, which is charging users to access a daily fee to access 60 mobile apps, including Facebook, Twitter and WhatsApp. And that began in July. And this trend is spreading across Africa, with other African nations considering it. The governments are claiming that it's to target fake news, gossip, that sort of thing, but there are fears that this is actually a crackdown on free speech on social media to quell the voices of young, disillusioned people who are protesting against these regimes.
But presumably that's not what the government's saying. What's their explanation for why this tax is apparently needed?
The Ugandan government claims the move is aimed at curbing false online gossip and that the money raised will be used to invest in more broadband infrastructure. Critics say it's actually going to massively harm the economy. And in fact, studies have already shown that this year alone, it's probably going to cost Uganda about $750 million.
But yeah, because we hear a lot of people saying that the digital economy represents a big opportunity for developing countries that don't perhaps have the same physical infrastructure. With that in mind, this seems pretty counterintuitive from the government, Felicity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it kind of just makes me laugh that the excuse is that it's social media is a place for idle gossip and it's to crack down, as if this is some sort of moral crusade for the good of people, which just makes me laugh, really. It's just bizarre on so many levels because I just don't see how it's going to work. It's just going to provoke the ire of so many people, especially in Uganda, young, disenfranchised people who won't be able to sort of engage in the political discussion. I mean, and it's also just not going to work in practical levels because I think lots of people are installing VPN, which is virtual private network software, and using that to taunt the government. So it's not working on that level. But I think it will also be counterproductive in that I think a report's come out recently that shows that the taxation will massively undermine economic growth in Uganda, reduce mobile operators' income, jeopardise jobs in the digital sector. Like the whole thing just, from start to end just doesn't seem like a good idea to me.
And as you say, the excuses they're coming up with for why they're doing this, there was a hysterical blog post in July by the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni, and he wrote in this blog comparing social media to so-called luxury consumer goods such as beer and tobacco, saying internet use can be sometimes for educational purposes and research. This should not be taxed. However, using internet to access social media for chatting, recreation, malice, subversion, inciting murder is definitely a luxury. It's like, wow, that jump from chatting to inciting murder.
it's easy for us to laugh at that kind of idea, but there have been cases recently in the news. In India, there have been people who've been lynched and beaten up by mobs because of rumours that spread on WhatsApp and also on Facebook. And Facebook's come under a lot of criticism as well. People have said that in Sri Lanka, it's been used to foment riots against Muslims. So there are instances where people are using social media to kind of incite, spread. We've heard a lot about fake news, but spread fake news and also incite violence.
But this is an economic sanction, so it's targeting poor people. The government in Benin, for example, this week have been criticised because ministers are continuing to use Twitter to promote government activities, which is very hypocritical. If it were about the wider issue of stopping the spread of fake news, why is it used through economic sanctions, which will affect, these charges don't sound like very much, but in effect, the charges in Benin, for example, has tripled the price of data bundles usually purchased by the poorest consumers. So this isn't going to affect richer people. It's the disillusioned youth.
I think we can all probably agree that the taxing and the kind of the hypocrisy of the way that the government's doing it is wrong. I think the thing is that a lot of people are seeing this from a very Western perspective and not really looking at it from the government and the way that these countries have been run previously. And the idea is that a lot of the time it has been a kind of, it's been a democracy, but it's been one where the government has quite a heavy and strict controls on people's aspects of their speech and the media and all of those things. And the social media in itself is probably something that they, first of all, see as quite a lucrative way of drumming up taxes and bringing in money, but also as something that is quite scary. If you've been in power for all these years and you haven't got yet a handle on exactly how to make it work for you, things like the Arab Spring and things like that, you're only going to, if you're in government, try and clamp down on it because of the way that it threatens you. I think also from a personal perspective, and not to play kind of devil's advocate, although I do miss Ollie, I think that the real issue is that I'd like to spend less time on social media.
Are you suggesting the government should tax you?
And I think in a way, if you're looking at the way that duties are leveraged on things like alcohol and smoking, and we know that social media as a thing is bad for you.
I know what you're doing.
I can see exactly this from a Western perspective.
What about scroll-free September? You make the choice. You don't need to be taxed. That's the point of the democracy, that it is up to you.
But the whole point about the Arab Spring was that it was where countries where there were no other routes, there were no other means to protest and to speak out. I think you can't look at it from our very privileged point of view and say, yes, I would like to spend less time on Facebook. This sounds like a really good idea. Well done, to this President Museveni who's ruled Uganda for 32 years. What a wonderful suggestion.
I'm just saying they're looking out for them. They're looking out for their...
It's not an appalling thing to say.
Kari. It's not just about, making political statements. It's also about, families who can't afford maybe phone calls, who can chat to each other on WhatsApp. Africa is a very big continent. It's just breaking down these links.
The other thing is that the economic sanctions are well over the top. So Tanzania have announced to charge citizens $920 to start a blog. And that's the equivalent.
That's yearly equivalent, fee, isn't it?
That's
that
the equivalent of America charging someone $60,000.
Yeah.
So the economic sanctions that they are choosing to impose are obviously intended to keep the poor.
They're also imposing other sanctions. Uganda has prior form with this sort of thing. During the February 2016 presidential and parliamentary elections, the government cut off access to social media, allegedly for security reasons. Egypt this summer passed a bill allowing the government to block any social media account with more than 5,000 followers if it finds that person has spread fake news.
And we haven't seen anything as dramatic as that in the UK, but we have seen debates, for instance, over age verification on porn sites and things like the Snoopers Charter. And all of it kind of raised the idea that internet is something that's increasingly crucial to most of us, but it is incredibly fragile. The government could theoretically, as they have done in some countries, switch it off at the flick of a button. Do we need legislation enshrining our right to the internet?
I think what's interesting is that this is a very extreme example of something that happened with net neutrality in the US that I think people haven't really got their head round quite yet. But the idea of net neutrality has been that every website or every user has access to the internet on the same playing field. Now, the US recently got rid of that ruling, and it basically meant that AT&T, Verizon, whoever it was, could bottleneck some users and basically give you a two-stream service. So if you paid more, you'd have better access to the internet than people who paid less. That is an example of, I mean, it's less crude than what these people are doing, but it's exactly the same example of how the internet is. We're unfortunately on a kind of slippery slope where the ideals of what the internet was when it was made or came up with in the mid-90s is being lost, and we're moving away from that situation, and we're basically letting governments their hands on something that was actually like a really nice utopian ideal for a bit anyway.
It's tricky. It does need to be controlled to some extent. You know, you've got the dark web, you've got some horrible things going on there. On the other hand, you know, it's drawing that line between illegality and censorship, and we need some sort of global definition of who should be doing that and how.
And equally, it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, I think it's quite easy, and I think when it's quite blatant, you know, I think it's quite easy for people to say, absolutely, this is not going to happen. And these countries like Zambia and Uganda, it's quite obvious to me what's going on here. Whereas, you know, I think there are ways of legislating and protection for the good of people, and when it goes too far, I think you can call it out quite easily.
I think it needs to come from the people, from the users, like not top down. It needs to come from people who are using the internet every day and understanding it, and it needs to come from what they want and how they want it to be regulated and how the majority of people want it to be regulated, rather than a top down draconian measures.
An online referendum, maybe.
Yeah. Deliberative democracy. I've mentioned it.
Okay. And so next up, we've got Jamie. Jamie, what will this week be remembered for?
This was the week we had the true acid test.
The Beckley Foundation and Imperial College are excited to announce a new study on psychedelic microdosing. What is microdosing? Microdosing is the regular use of small doses of psychedelics. At these small doses, the perception-altering effects are not present. However, a considerable number of people have reported improvements in mood, creativity, and well-being. While these reports are encouraging, we need more robust forms of evidence. Past and current scientific research with psychedelics focuses on much larger doses, and there's been almost no work on microdosing. So why carry out this study? At the moment, we just don't know if microdoses report feeling better because of the pharmacological effects of the microdose, or simply because they expect to feel better, the placebo effect. To tackle this question, we've developed a method for microdosers to set up their own placebo control. People who wish to contribute to psychedelic research will be asked to prepare capsules filled with either microdoses or nothing at all. After labeling, mixing, and randomly assigning the capsules, participants will take them one at a time without knowing whether they contain a microdose or a placebo.
That was a video posted online by the Beckley Foundation at the end of last week, looking for volunteers for a new study of microdosing. So, Jamie, to be clear, it doesn't mean seeing magical colours and then boring everyone about them for the next 30 years.
Imagine not. But it's difficult to know at the moment. The basis of or at least why I've brought it, is that this week we'll see what they hope to be the kind of first, it's not a clinical trial, but it is the first attempt at studying the benefits of microdosing LSD, particularly in this example. Microdosing is the idea that you take it's sub-perceptual is the word that they use, and that basically means that you take some of LSD, but not enough for you to be aware of the effect that it's having on you. So we're not seeing funny ideas, we're not voting in the Tories. You know, what we're looking at is very small doses. And the idea, or at least the benefit, it's had two, in terms of the people that do it, there are two camps. One is people who have suffered from depression or some kind of mental illness who have said that microdosing has alleviated the effects of mental illness. The others, and the one that's been popular particularly in Silicon Valley, has been this move to take minuscule amounts of LSD that then increases your productivity, people have said, and also increases their creativity. This test is basically taking people who already microdose and asking them to also at the same time take a placebo and try and work out whether or not the effects are, so they'll divide up into groups, it'll be the standard placebo testing way. And so some people will take the microdose that they're usually taking, and then some people will be taking the placebo, but you won't know which one is which, obviously. And then they will then report back on, or they'll have to take tests, basically.
And so why are they choosing people who already microdose, and why are they going to be supplying their own microdoses? Is that a study that we can draw reliable conclusions from?
Cost is the main issue. So there hasn't actually been any scientific studies up until this point, despite the fact that people want to do it. And that's mainly due to the price of taking an illegal substance. And their hope is, and the benefits of this, is that because a clinical trial, because of the cost, the problems with cost, it would be a very small sample. The idea is that they think there's hundreds of thousands of people that are microdosing currently in the world, and if they can persuade them all to take part, because it's an online game as well.
And the cost is because it's illegal, presumably. So they're
So
being...
is this bribing government ministers or...
Yeah. That's the
Can I just ask how you microdose? Because I read it's 1/15 of an LSD tab. So if you just want to microdose on your own in your kitchen, do you just have
Very
to break
interested
your
If a
tab?
hard-working magazine editor wanted to increase her creativity.
Hypothetically, guys, how would
Are you literally cutting a tablet into 15 pieces, or is there some other way of doing it?
I believe that maybe it won't be it, although I don't know, because obviously I don't do it, wouldn't participate in this kind of thing. Was it wouldn't be in, they would crush it down, weigh it, and then divide it up.
I read between sort of 10 and 20 milligrams, which could be weighed, presumably, in the home.
Yeah.
And you're doing that yourself
Yes.
at the kitchen table.
So it's all quite
That's a huge amount of
DIY.
self-discipline. Why don't you just take the whole thing?
Because that's not
I mean,
why
that's
they're
not
doing it. They're not looking to see
How
funny
high you
pictures
get.
and see how high. Obviously, if they want to take LSD in their own time, they can in like big tab forms. But they're doing it specifically to take minimal amounts that improve your creativity and apparently improve your productivity.
And you mentioned that this is the first thing kind of approaching even a scientific trial. Is there any evidence beyond people who've taken it saying that it works?
So there was a 2016 trial in New York that looked at the effects of psychoglobin, which is actually what comes in mushrooms, but is a very similar thing to LSD, on depression. And so there has been tests on using hallucinogens on mental health and mental illness, but this would be the first test on productivity, because obviously people aren't going to spend that much amount of money looking at trials on whether or not you can work harder. Like, the thing that they're looking to do is whether or not it could be like a clinical, a drug, basically, like a medical drug.
I mean, but the catch-22 of this situation is that these drugs are banned because they have no accepted... Since 1970, the US government classified these drugs in Schedule 1, which means they have no medical use, which is a de facto ban on their use in laboratories and clinical trials. You've got this catch-22 that the drugs are banned because they have no accepted medical use, but researchers can't explore the therapeutic potential because they're banned.
What I think is interesting, and you're right, Kari, that's a real problem and one thing that will have to change. But I think if we look at the way that medicinal cannabis, the charting of the medicinal cannabis has gone, we have very quickly gone from saying, oh no, that's not something we do here. If I was the parent of a 12-year-old child that could only be helped, if their epilepsy could only be helped through using it, then you would do it. And then suddenly now we've moved to Sajid Javid saying that actually medicinal cannabis is going to be legal and we're going to legalise it. And I think the thing is that if we can prove that things like LSD and MDMA for PTSD and stuff...
Is the distinction not that marijuana's been, its use for the treatment of diseases and conditions from, malaria to rheumatism, that's been logged for thousands of years. LSD was only invented in, 1936, so there's a lot less history and...
Yes,
and it's not natural, is it? It's scarier. LSD is a scary drug compared to marijuana. Everyone can kind of... I don't think people are as put off by the idea of smoking a natural herb.
It's that naturalness.
We have
it's
to,
the naturalness. Whereas LSD, made in a lab, if you're lucky.
If we want to move further forward in, progress in this science, we have to get away from our ideas of what is natural and what is not. The thing is that if alcohol had been made in the past 30 years, it would have been a Class A, no doubt. And so we can't continually live our lives by, oh, well, this is okay because we're kind of used to it and our mate down the pub drinks it. And we have to look at if this does have an effect. And, there have been countless examples of... so MDMA, particularly in PTSD people, it would alleviate if you give them just one dosage of MDMA has been shown to get rid of PTSD.
There was a study in May. Sorry.
I thought with this story in particular, it was more to do with the actual dosage and the amount that you're taking. And I was going down, when I was reading about it, I was going down more the route that what happens if it's just so minimal that it's not actually having any effect whatsoever, and that the people in the study who are taking the placebo, because I was reading about, they're sort of saying it's going to be very, very interesting if there are some weeks when the person in the trial is on a placebo and actually saying, oh yeah, I'm feeling really great and I know it's an LSD week, and it's actually not. And I wonder what happens then in terms of the whole microdosing thing actually is just
one of
totally
the
erroneous
and like,
not a thing at all.
I guess it's hard to. The thing is with microdosing is that it's very hard. There are tests that you can do about your creativity. So there's one which is about how quickly you get into creative thinking. And that's one of the ones that they're going to be taking online. And that partially the problem with this test is that if you are taking the placebo, you're already a big fan of microdosing because it's self-selecting in the sense that they're only getting people who microdose in this example. And so there's going to be false positives for sure.
But that's the point of the placebo effect anyway, is that it's a relationship between the body and the mind. Like you have to believe. It's like homeopathy, for example. If you go into it being like, this is a pile of BS and definitely doesn't work, it's never going to work. If you kind of believe that there is that placebo effect can do something to you and make you more positive and have a better relationship between your body and mind, then it is working even though nothing's working, if that makes sense.
And presumably people may have a different I totally agree with that. And also presumably people may have a different tolerance to drugs. So what what is an effective microdose for someone may not be for another.
But then you could argue, we're talking especially about the mental health impact, is that in the current system, we already have a situation where people are struggling to find the right treatment for conditions like depression, going through different types of therapy, different pills, and, sometimes having, really bad reactions to them as well. Could hallucinogenics be like a viable answer, like a new way of dealing with our mental health crisis? We're always hearing about how the UK is facing a growing problem with mental health.
I think it certainly could, but I think what's interesting is that you could think that you are taking a microdose of LSD and you're not at all, and that could still make you feel better. And I think that's really exciting, the idea that you can make yourself believe you are better and you are on LSD when you're not at all.
And I think the thing is, particularly about mental health problems, is that it's not such an easy... If I were to break my leg, I could take x-rays and see that it was fixed. I could see that the bone had grown back and it made whereas with a mental health issue, you can't do that. You can't say that someone's fixed up beyond how they feel. And so partially what you're saying about the placebo effect could be that we could just persuade, it could end up persuading people that they are feeling better, and then...
All right, but
what's the difference?
Cutting all of the hippy-dippy stuff, even if this trial comes back and there is more and more clinical evidence that this does work, be it for mental health, be it for creativity, be it for any other thing, is it going to be integrated into the health system anytime soon? Or is it not just too controversial and too scary? That's right. Asking the tough questions.
I think charting medicinal cannabis as an example, I think if there's if it works, if you look at the mental health issues at university that have happened in the last couple of years, and if there's examples of people taking it and it changing people's lives and improving people's, I saw there was a recent study out that showed that people who had heavy suicidal thoughts, if just one dosage of ketamine moved them off that train of thought, not forever,
for how long?
but it was for like 6 weeks, I think was the study length, and it basically said we could use ketamine as a one-hit thing to stop people killing themselves. It wouldn't last forever, and it's not a long-term fix, but at least gets them out of that way of looking at the world. And so I think that the only way that medical things progress and the only way we make change is when there's a big enough swell of people that are saying something needs to be done.
I think the case of the little boy Billy Caldwell that you were alluding to, Jamie, and Sajid Javid coming out, I think that was a really seismic change. I thought that was a shift in the tide, and I think especially when it does come to children, if we are sort of seeing drugs, I mean, I know what you were saying is sort of perceived as a softer drug, but I thought that was some way, and kind of maybe I still feel like LSD is a step too far. But also it's kind of like we don't know enough about, I think that's what scares people, we don't know enough about what the side effects are or that sort of thing, and
the long-term effects. Surely the next step would be to just decriminalise, well not just decriminalise, would be to decriminalise it, and then it can, and then people have that option, and then it's at their it's up to them. It's their responsibility whether they harm themselves or not, but obviously not making it available on the NHS anytime soon.
I think the idea of the
on drugs.
I think the idea of the trial and the hope is that at least, they don't think they're going to come. It's not a clinical trial. That's what they say. They're not looking for people to say that this will be the answer. But the hope is that if they can show that there are some effects or there is some positivity to it, that it'll mean that then that will be used as a basis to then do a clinical trial or be able to open it up to clinical trials.
Yeah, a more controlled clinical trial.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we'll bring that trip to an end. Felicity, you're last up this week. What should we be talking about this week?
Is Jameela Jamil right to weigh in on the Kardashians?
The double agent for the patriarchy is basically just a woman who perhaps unknowingly is still putting the patriarchal narrative out into the world, is still benefiting off, profiting off, and selling a patriarchal narrative to other women. But it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Just because you look like a woman, we trust you and we think you're on our side, but you are selling us something that really doesn't make us feel good. You're selling us an ideal, a body shape, a problem with our wrinkles, a problem with aging, a problem with gravity, a problem with any kind of body fat. You're selling us self-consciousness. The same poison that made you clearly develop some sort of body dysmorphia or facial dysmorphia, you are now pouring back into the world. You're like recycling hatred. And I find that really dangerous, and I think it's unacceptable, and I don't care if you're a woman.
That was Jameela Jamil speaking to Krishnan and Guru Murthy on Channel 4's Ways to Change the World podcast. Felicity, double agents of the patriarchy. Sounds like the world's worst spy thriller. So is Jameela Jamil leading a new frontier in feminism, or is this just the old adage that we're our own worst enemy?
Quite possibly. It's definitely a debate that seems to have divided a lot of people on social media this week. So Jameela Jamil she used to be a T4 presenter and is now an actor in Hollywood on a show called The Good Place.
Yeah, it's good.
But she's also very outspoken social campaigner about body image and body positivity, and she's sort of rippling waves for going after the Kardashians, and sort of every time Kim Kardashian posts something about, I don't know, I think one case was she was promoting an appetite suppressing lollipop with a very hypersexualized image of her sucking on a lollipop, and Jameela didn't mince her words and just said, fuck off, you terrible and toxic influence on young girls, and just basically said that women who are making other women feel self-conscious about the way they look are in no way feminist and are in no way a good force for women. And instead of sort of being like, oh, we're women, we all stick together, all women are wonderful, it's about calling out other women who are doing the majority of women absolutely no favours at all.
So what this seems to come down to then, Kari, is the debate around choice feminism, this idea that feminism means respecting women's choices, whatever they are. It's become a very kind of mainstream pillar of third wave feminism, but is it time we looked at choice feminism a bit more critically?
Well, could you not say that, free speech is the right to say whatever you want, but you're not allowed to peddle hate? And Jameela Jamil has actually accused the Kardashians of recycled hatred, to abuse power that you've been given, to abuse that right to free speech and to give your opinions, then I think call them out on it.
I mean, what's the line? Is it abusing your power if you post pictures of yourself in a sexualized way? Because someone could argue theoretically that you're brainwashing girls into viewing themselves as sex objects, but then where do you draw the line and say, well, you can't wear hot pants in a photo?
I don't think it's so much the hypersexualized thing. I think that's possibly one. I mean, critics are saying that Jamil is basically slut shaming, and that is why she's attacking the Kardashians, because they are hypersexualized. I think it's more this ideal that they send out, and and they are role models. It's this ideal that you have to be sort of curvy but super skinny, and I mean, they might claim, oh no, we're not. She's advertising a lolly.
But I think it's also the idea that I think the Kardashians would retort, well, I am feminist, I am liberated because I get to put pictures up of me topless, I get to do this, I'm a businesswoman, I'm a feminist, I'm a woman. And I think that's what really grates, and that's why I kind of agree with Jameela, is like, that's not feminism. Like, you are literally doing this for yourself, and the point of feminism is it's a movement for all women. You bring everyone up with you by your actions.
That's the
all
point.
You're doing is it is sort of insidious, and it is having a really damaging effect, because you're posting a picture of yourself topless, you're saying getting this appetite suppressant lollipop, and that's not bringing other women up, that's making everyone else feel shit about themselves.
And that's the thing, they could claim, oh, we're reversing this patriarchy, we're using it to make money, but at the expense of whom?
Exactly.
But what makes this debate a bit more complicated is that this isn't the first time that Jameela Jamil has targeted the Kardashians. In fact, a lot of people, she's kind of met with her own backlash on Twitter now, people saying that she's attacking them and demeaning them. So is she the real double agent? Is she just, should we be backbiting, as some critics are describing her behaviour, or should we be kind of papering over the cracks to attack what, some would say is the wider goal of these male-dominated institutions?
Jameela Jamil's not the first person to attack the Kardashians, and I don't think it really bothers them, as far as I can tell.
Kim Kardashian deleted that post after
the
appetite deleted it.
But I think the appetite suppressant one was an interesting idea because actually it targeted something that she could, rather than being about her, she was doing an ad basically, and it was about the kind of things that she sponsored. Whereas if you're saying that the way that she sexualizes herself in photos is a problem, she's not going to stop doing that. She hasn't shown any inkling. This has been a thing for a long time, since the Kardashians came onto TV, the effect that it's having on young women. A lot of the ways that you would imagine someone might change their way, change the way that they act and change the way that they behave. As far as I'm aware, she's not doing that. She's saying, this is me.
Yeah, she has. I mean, she hasn't responded to Jameela Jamil's latest attack, as far as I'm aware. But she has posted plenty of messages in the past sort of saying this sort of criticism isn't fair. She wrote in 2016, I don't do drugs, I hardly drink, I've never committed a crime, and yet I'm a bad role model for being proud of my body. So, she's deflecting away, sort of again, turning this into this, it's my right as a woman, and I'm showing my strength by showing off my body. I think she's missing the point.
I think her mistake maybe is that she was too explicit about it, crossing the line from the subconscious message of this is the kind of body you should have to, and this is where you can buy the appetite suppressant lolly to make it happen. It kind of opens up the wider idea about celebrity idols. They've got massive social media presence, and they use it to cultivate a kind of sense of closeness and friendship with their fans. You get to see into their lives, and then they turn around and start promoting paid sponsorships.
Well, the Kardashians, they've got a multi-million empire of so many products that they're selling, and it all generally tends to revolve around lipsticks, and it is all based on appearance.
And Jamie, isn't it a particularly insidious kind of advertising, to take advantage of this kind of faux friendship with millions of people who not only look up to you, in the way that people always have done to celebrities, but really feel like they're part of your life and that they can trust what you say?
Yeah, but then I also wonder how different what's happening now is to the way that, like, Ian Rush sold milk in the 70s, or Gary Lineker sells crisps in the 90s, in the nows even.
What? That's not about you've got to be this ideal.
No, but the question that you were asking was about whether or not promoting products is a bad thing.
Well, isn't it about which products you're promoting and
who
what the message is behind
how
them?
You're influencing young girls. I don't think Gary Lineker selling Walker's crisps is quite the same thing.
He's not saying you're going to be a better footballer if you eat crisps. Whereas
I think
the implicit message,
so the idea of the sugary cereals, say, or advertising that kind of thing, or saying that you should eat these as part of anyone doing McDonald's ads, any of the footballers doing McDonald's ads, and then saying there is obviously a way of saying, if you eat this, you can still be like Usain Bolt, or if you eat this, you can still be an athlete. And that has happened for 20, 30 years.
But there is a growing voice against these sort of sugary snacks.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing.
Women are still being bombarded with these. This is how you need to look. There isn't such a loud voice of, do you know what? You don't actually need to weigh.
And that's what I think is really positive about the Jameela Jamil thing, is that she's actually just saying, and quite crudely saying, no, just fuck off. You can't continue to do this.
But I also think it's more about I think what Jameela's doing is opening up the conversation about role models and what we expect from women who are in the spotlight. And I think it's an interesting time. You've got Ashley Graham, who's a plus-size model, who's just graced one of the glossy magazines. I think it's the first time they've had a plus-size model. And I mean, there's a discussion within that in itself, because some people would say she's not a body-positive role model anyway, in the same way that a super skinny anorexic woman isn't. But regardless of that, I do think the more women and the more body shapes and the less sort of pernicious discourse there is about this, the better. And I think, I certainly think in my lifetime it's changed. I think when I was growing up, and I think I'm a similar age to Jameela, and she was talking about growing up in a world of Kate Moss and Jodie Kidd and heroin chic and super, super skinny and all that sort of thing. And it's some ways it's getting worse because social media, women and girls can see images all the time. But equally, I think, women like Lena Dunham, and I just think more women having a discussion, and the idea that we don't all have to just say because she's a woman it's fine. I think you can call out other women when they're getting it wrong.
I think also just engaging with more things as being problematic is really important. I think for a lot of people, certainly in my generation, there is an attempt to shut down the debate or things that we say by being like, oh, you're being a snowflake, or you can't say anything these days, or like everything is a problem. And actually, I think engaging with things critically, be it Friends or something, or all the way through
your Friends or the 90s sitcom.
The 90s sitcom, engaging critically with the 90s sitcom Friends, or moving forward even the pictures of women. I think everything, the more that as a group we say, is this problematic or isn't it, or is this acceptable or is it not? Even something like Lena Dunham and Girls, that had its own is this problematic and criticisms. And I think that has moved us forward so much as a society.
But I think it's still totally revolutionary that someone is even putting their head on saying, hang on, is this a problem?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just the baby steps that we're at the point where we can actually have a conversation. So I think growing up, for me personally, it was just the accepted norm that you had to look a certain way. Otherwise, your life was probably going to be a bit crap. And I think it's nice now to see more women being like, that's not the case. Women come in all shapes and sizes. We all do different sorts of things. Like, let's have a discussion. It's very
healthier.
Complex.
It's a much healthier scenario.
And that's probably enough critical engagement for this week. That's it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Felicity Capon, Kari, Wilkin and Jamie Timson. We are at Week Unwrapped on Twitter if you fancy telling us what you think of this week's show. And if you really like the podcast, you can write a review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps others find us. Stay subscribed to hear Business Unwrapped, which will be dropping onto your feed on Monday. That's our series of bonus stories brought to you by our friends at Barclays Corporate Banking. And if you're not subscribed, do it now. Search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. I've been Rebecca Gillie. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer was Rebecca Grisdale-Sherry at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, goodbye.